Hey everyone and welcome back. Today we are diving into a question that never gets old. Do animals have consciousness?
It's a big one for sure.
Yeah, and to help us unpack it all, we're turning to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry on animal consciousness.
Oh, yeah, that's a great resource.
It really is. It covers like everything, the history, the science, the
The
ethics.
whole shebang.
Exactly. So get ready for some serious mind-blowing stuff.
I think this deep dive really gets to the heart of who we are?
Yeah, like are we humans really so special, or
Right.
do we share this consciousness thing with other creatures?
And what does that even mean for how we treat them?
Exactly. That's a huge question when you consider how many animals we use for food research.
You're talking billions.
It's mind-boggling. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's start with like the basics. What do we actually mean when we say consciousness?
Well, that's the tricky part, right? It's one of those words that everyone uses, but no one really agrees on what it means.
I think,
So for this deep dive, let's focus on what's called phenomenal consciousness or sentience.
okay, I've heard that term before, but break it down for us. What does that actually mean?
Basically, it's about subjective experience, what it feels like to do an organism, like the raw feels, the sensations.
It's not just about like being awake versus asleep.
It's deeper than that. It's about actually having an inner world.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. So how do scientists even begin to study that in animals? Especially since animals can't, just tell us what they're feeling.
Right, that's the million-dollar question, and it's been a challenge for a long time. For centuries, scientists relied mostly on observing animal behavior.
And then making inferences based on that.
Exactly, but that obviously leads to a lot of subjective interpretation.
For sure. It's like, are we just projecting our own thoughts and feelings onto animals?
It's a valid concern. Think about Descartes back in the 17th century.
Oh, yeah, he's the I think therefore I am guy, right?
That's the one. He basically believed that animals were just complex machines.
Like robots, basically.
Kind of, yeah, driven by reflexes and instincts, no real feelings or inner life.
That seems kind of harsh. I mean, anyone who's spent time with a cat knows they have feelings.
Well, yeah, a lot of people felt that way even back then. Darwin, for instance.
Mr. Evolution himself?
Yep. He argued that there's a continuity of mental experience between humans and animals.
So like a spectrum.
Exactly. He pointed to animals' abilities to adapt, learn, solve problems.
Things that robots probably couldn't do back then.
Right. So even way back then, there were different schools of thought.
And then fast forward to the 20th century, we have behaviorism entering the picture.
Oh, yeah, that was a big shift.
Didn't that kind of put the brakes on animal consciousness research?
In a way, yeah, behaviorists believed that only observable behaviors could be studied scientifically.
So anything going on inside the mind was off limits.
Pretty much, yeah. Consciousness was considered too subjective, too difficult to measure.
So instead of trying to understand what animals might be experiencing, the focus shifted to simply how they behave.
Exactly. It was all about stimulus and response.
But how did we get from there to where we are today with all the research on animal minds?
Well, thanks to some forward-thinking scientists like Donald Griffin, there was a resurgence of interest in animal cognition.
So Griffin was like, hey, there's more to these animals than meets the eye.
Exactly. He pointed out that animals were doing some pretty amazing things that couldn't be explained by simple reflexes or conditioning.
So we went from seeing animals as robots to recognizing their complex cognitive skills.
That's a great way to put it. And that shift opened up a whole new world of research possibilities.
Which brought us right back to those fundamental philosophical questions.
The big ones. Can we know which animals are conscious?
And if so, can we ever really know what their experiences are actually like?
Those are the million-dollar questions that continue to drive this field of research.
Because we're talking about this inner world of subjective experience. How can we ever truly know what's going on inside an animal's mind?
Right. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
So are we just stuck? Is it impossible to study phenomenal consciousness scientifically?
Some argue that it is, but others believe we can find clues by looking at things like brain structures, physiological responses, and behavioral patterns.
So it's like we're detectives searching for evidence to piece together this mystery.
I like that analogy, and there are a lot of different pieces to this puzzle that we need to consider.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, one of the key areas of focus has been on the structure and function of consciousness.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. What do we mean by structure and function in this context?
Sure. By structure, we're talking about the content of consciousness, like what kind of information is being processed, what mental representations are involved.
So it's like trying to figure out what's actually going on inside the mind.
Right. And then function refers to the purpose or role of consciousness. How does it help an animal survive and interact with its environment?
Does it aid in things like decision making?
Exactly. Or problem solving or social interactions.
So by understanding the structure and function of consciousness in different species, we might be able to get clues about which ones might be conscious.
Precisely. Different theories about structure and function lead to different hypotheses about the distribution of consciousness across the animal kingdom.
Okay, so let's talk about those hypotheses. Where do scientists stand on which animals might be conscious?
Well, there's a whole spectrum of views, and it's a pretty lively debate.
Are humans still considered like the gold standard of consciousness?
Some still hold on to that idea, yes.
Really? Even with all the research showing how smart other animals are?
You'd be surprised. There are some pretty compelling arguments for human uniqueness.
Like what? What makes us so special in their eyes?
We'll take Daniel Dennett, for example.
Oh, I've heard of him. He's a big name in philosophy of mind.
He is, and he argues that consciousness is closely tied to language.
Okay, so our ability to communicate complex ideas.
Right, and specifically our ability to tell stories about ourselves and the world.
That's interesting. So animals lacking sophisticated language wouldn't be capable of consciousness in his view.
That's his argument. And then you have Peter Carruthers, who has a slightly different take.
Filson,
He believes that consciousness requires a specific type of self-awareness.
what does that mean exactly?
He calls it higher order thought, being able to think about your own thoughts.
Whoa, that's like metacognition, right? Thinking about thinking.
Exactly. And he links this to having a theory of mind.
Which is the ability to understand that others have their own beliefs and desires, right?
And he argues that there's pretty weak evidence for theory of mind in non-human animals, even chimpanzees,
So in his view, consciousness might be limited to humans.
with the possible exception for chimps, but even that's debatable.
Wow, so even our closest primate relatives might not make the cut. That's pretty exclusive.
It is, but that's just one perspective. There are other hypotheses that are more inclusive.
Okay, I'm all ears. Let's hear about those.
Some focus on specific groups of animals like the great apes.
Okay, those are our closest relatives, right? Chimps, bonobos, gorillas.
You got it. And Jordan Gallup, for instance, is a big proponent of great ape consciousness.
He's the one who came up with that famous mirror test, right?
Exactly. You put a mark on an animal and see if they recognize themselves in the mirror.
So if they touch the mark on their own body, it shows they understand that the reflection is them.
Right. And Gallup believes that chimpanzees, bonobos, and orangutans, which consistently pass this test, show signs of self-awareness.
And therefore consciousness.
In his view, yes, but he's not convinced about other animals like monkeys that fail the test.
So the great apes might be in the consciousness club. But what about other mammals? Dogs, cats, dolphins?
Well, a lot of scientists believe that mammals in general are likely conscious.
What evidence supports that?
Well, researchers like Jack Panksepp have been studying the neural systems involved in emotions.
Oh, so like the brain regions and chemicals that make us feel happy, sad, afraid.
Exactly. And they've found that mammals share many of the same brain structures and neurochemicals that are involved in human emotions.
So similar brain structures, similar emotional responses. That's pretty convincing.
It is, and this evidence has led some to propose that consciousness is widespread among mammals.
Makes sense. So mammals seem like a pretty safe bet. But let's push the boundaries even further. What about going beyond mammals? Birds, reptiles, fish.
Now we're getting into some even more controversial territory.
Are those animals even in the running when it comes to consciousness?
Well, that's what we're going to explore next. Some researchers believe that consciousness might extend to all amniotes.
Whoa, hold on, amniotes. Like, what does that even include?
Think mammals, birds, and reptiles. They all develop in a sac filled with fluid, you know?
Oh, right. Okay, so that's a pretty big group. What makes scientists think they might all be conscious?
Well, researchers like Michael Kabanak point to specific behaviors that seem to indicate consciousness in these animals' behaviors you don't really see in other types of animals.
Like what? Give me an example.
One example is their ability to make motivational trade-offs.
Motivational trade-offs, so like choosing between different rewards.
Exactly, or even delaying gratification.
Yeah, that does seem to require some level of awareness.
Right, and they also point to play behavior.
Play. You mean like animals having fun?
Yeah, suggesting a flexible and adaptable mind.
Interesting. So if an animal can like plan, make choices, and even enjoy themselves, it could be a sign of consciousness.
Potentially, yeah. It's not foolproof, of course, but it's definitely something to consider.
What else are scientists looking at? Besides behavior, I mean,
Well, they also cite something called emotional fever.
emotional fever. Is that like when you get a fever when you're stressed?
Kind of. It's a temporary rise in body temperature when an animal is stressed.
Oh, wow. So even a fever could be a clue.
And what's interesting is that amniotes experience this, but amphibians and fish don't.
That is interesting. It's amazing how researchers are piecing together all these different pieces of the puzzle.
It really is a fascinating field. Of course, none of these behavioral indicators are foolproof, and there could be other explanations, but it definitely raises the possibility that consciousness evolved in the common ancestor of all amniotes.
So that would mean dinosaurs could have been conscious too.
Potentially, yeah. It's mind-blowing to think about.
Totally. Okay, so we've covered mammals, birds, and reptiles. What about fish? I mean, they seem so different from us.
Yeah, fish are a really interesting case. They've been at the center of a lot of debate, especially when it comes to whether they can feel pain.
Right, because that's a huge ethical question. If we're causing fish to suffer, we need to know.
Absolutely, and there's definitely evidence that fish have nociceptors.
Nociceptors. Remind me what those are again?
Those are like tiny sensors that detect potential harm or injury.
Oh, right. So they can sense things that would be painful to us.
Right, but does that automatically mean they're consciously experiencing pain? That's the big question.
Yeah, I could see how that's tricky to figure out.
Some argue that fish lack certain brain structures found in mammals like the anterior cingulate cortex, which is involved in processing the emotional aspect of pain.
So they might be registering the physical sensation, but not feeling the emotional suffering that we associate with pain.
That's one possibility. But then again, fish display a lot of complex behaviors, learning memory, even social interactions.
And they show signs of stress and anxiety, right?
Exactly. So it's not a simple answer.
It seems like we keep hitting this wall. Some evidence points towards consciousness, while other evidence suggests otherwise.
That's the nature of this research. It's complex, and there's rarely a clear-cut answer.
I guess that's science for you. Always more questions than answers.
Exactly, but that's what keeps it exciting. So where were we? Oh yeah, we were talking about fish.
Right, and how it's tough to say for sure whether they're conscious.
And it's the same story with amphibians.
So we're still in the gray area with those groups.
Pretty much. There's just not enough conclusive evidence to say one way or the other.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second. We've talked about a lot of different species and a lot of different theories. Is there any sort of consensus starting to emerge from all of this?
Well, there seems to be a growing consensus that mammals are most likely conscious.
Okay, so mammals are a pretty safe bet.
I think so. They share so many similarities with us, both in behavior and brain structure, that it's hard to deny.
But beyond that, it sounds like the jury's still out on a lot of other animals.
That's right. But that's the beauty of science, isn't it? We're always learning and refining our understanding as new evidence comes to light.
True. Speaking of pushing the boundaries of our understanding, what about invertebrates? Insects, spiders, octopuses, are they even on the radar when it comes to consciousness?
That's a huge question, and one that we're only just beginning to explore in depth.
Why is that? Why are invertebrates so tricky to study in this context?
Well, for one thing, they're incredibly diverse.
Millions of species, right?
Exactly. And they have vastly different body plans and nervous systems compared to vertebrates.
So using the same criteria that we've been applying to vertebrates might not even be appropriate.
You got it. We might be totally missing the mark when it comes to recognizing signs of consciousness in invertebrates.
It's like we're trying to understand an alien intelligence.
Perfect analogy. We might not even recognize it if it was right in front of us.
That's a trippy thought. So we might need entirely new frameworks and ways of thinking to even approach the question.
Exactly. But just because it's difficult doesn't mean we should give up.
For sure.
There are some really fascinating areas of research emerging, especially when it comes to cephalopods.
Cephalopods. You mean like octopuses and squid?
Yep, those guys. They've been capturing the imaginations of scientists and the public alike for their remarkable intelligence.
Oh yeah, they're famous for being super smart.
They are. And it's not just anecdotal. They have these large, complex brains, and they're incredibly flexible in their behavior.
Problem-solving tool use complex communication.
All of that. And some researchers even believe they could have some form of consciousness.
Wow. To think that consciousness could arise through a completely different evolutionary path.
It would definitely challenge our assumptions about what consciousness is and where it might exist in the animal kingdom.
For sure. So it's not just cephalopods that are interesting in this regard.
Not at all. There's growing interest in the cognitive abilities of insects, too.
Insects. Really. I mean, they just seem so small and like driven by instinct.
I know. It's hard to imagine what the inner world of an ant or a bee might be like.
Yeah. It's hard to wrap my head around that.
But they demonstrate some pretty complex skills: navigation, communication, learning, memory.
So even tiny creatures could be harboring unexpected mental abilities?
Absolutely. And some researchers believe that consciousness might be much more widespread than we initially thought,
How wide are we talking?
potentially extending even to simple invertebrates with basic nervous systems.
So consciousness could be like an ancient and fundamental aspect of animal life?
It's a possibility. Some argue that consciousness evolved early on as a way to integrate sensory information and guide behavior, even in creatures with very simple nervous systems.
Wow. That would mean countless species on Earth could be experiencing the world consciously in their own unique ways.
It's truly humbling to think about. And it underscores why this research is so important. The more we learn about animal consciousness, the more we learn about the nature of consciousness itself.
And our place in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive so far. We've gone from ancient philosophers to cutting-edge neuroscience, from great apes to tiny insects. My mind is officially blown.
No, we're not done yet. There are still so many questions to be answered, and it's such an exciting time to be exploring animal consciousness.
I'm ready for more. What else have you got for us? I'm ready for more. What else have you got for us?
Well, we were just starting to talk about how fascinating invertebrates are.
Yeah, those cephalopods. They're like something out of science fiction.
Seriously, I mean, think about octopuses. They can change color and texture. They can squeeze through tiny spaces.
And they're super smart.
Right. It's like they have 9 brains.
Wait, really? 9 brains?
Well, kind of. Each of their arms has a mini brain that can act independently.
No way. That's wild.
It is. And then they have a central brain that coordinates everything.
So they can process information and make decisions in a totally different way than we do?
It really challenges our understanding of how intelligence works.
It's like they're aliens living right here on Earth.
I love that analogy. And, some researchers believe that this decentralized nervous system could actually support a form of consciousness that's very different from our own.
So instead of having one single self, like we do,
Right, octopuses might have a more distributed sense of self.
that's mind-blowing. It's like their consciousness is spread out throughout their body.
Exactly, and that's just one example of how invertebrates are forcing us to rethink our assumptions about consciousness.
It's like we're only just scratching the surface of understanding these amazing creatures.
Exactly, and who knows what other surprises are out there waiting to be discovered.
Okay, so besides cephalopods, what other invertebrates are getting scientists excited these days?
Well, believe it or not, insects are starting to get some serious attention.
Insects. Really? I mean, I know they're incredibly diverse and abundant.
Most successful group of animals on the planet.
But honest, it's kind of hard to imagine what the inner world of an ant or a bee might be like.
I know, it seems so foreign to us, but when you really look at their behavior, they do some pretty amazing things.
Like what?
Well, for example, bees can communicate the location of food sources to their hive mates using this elaborate dance language.
Oh, yeah. I've seen videos of that. It's like they're doing a little waggle dance.
Exactly. And ants can navigate complex mazes and remember the shortest route back to their nest.
Wow. So they're not just tiny automatons running on instinct.
Definitely not. They're capable of learning and problem solving and adapting to their environment.
So are scientists suggesting that insects might actually be conscious?
Some are starting to ask that question, and it's a really tricky one to answer because we don't have any easy way to measure consciousness.
Right. It's not like we can just ask an ant how it's feeling.
Exactly. But the more we learn about insects' behavior, the more we realize just how complex and sophisticated it is.
So even the tiniest creatures might be harboring unexpected mental abilities.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the bigger picture of animal consciousness.
Which is?
That we still have so much to learn. We're just at the beginning of this journey of discovery.
And every new discovery seems to challenge our assumptions about what it means to be conscious.
Exactly. It's a humbling and awe-inspiring field of study.
Well, I don't know about you, but this deep dive has definitely left me with more questions than answers.
Me too. But that's a good thing, right? It means there's still so much more to explore.
Absolutely. So to all you listeners out there, keep asking questions, stay curious, and let's keep learning about the amazing world around us. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.